Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, they come from the people you love most, right when you think you're doing something good for them. My name is Elise, and for the last 2 years, I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and cut every personal luxury to save for something special. A once-in-a-lifetime, all-expenses-paid trip to Europe for my parents. They'd never traveled abroad, and I wanted to give them the experience of a lifetime. It was my way of saying thank you for everything they'd done for me. I chose the dates carefully, picked out 5-star hotels in Paris, Rome, and Vienna, reserved private guided tours, and even arranged for gourmet dinners in scenic locations. I had this vision of the 3 of us sitting under the stars on a balcony in Florence, laughing, connecting, being a family. But reality hit harder than I could have ever imagined. That morning, I pulled up to my childhood home just before 6 a.m., heart racing with excitement. I was right on schedule. I expected to see my parents waiting by the door, bags in hand, ready for our adventure. And they were, but not alone. My younger sister Marissa stepped out right behind them, dragging a suitcase behind her. I blinked, confused. Is she just seeing us off? I thought. But the cheerful expression on my mother's face immediately struck me as off. It was forced, too bright. "Elise," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we've made a slight change. Marissa's coming on the trip instead of you." The world stopped. "What?" I asked, the word coming out hollow, like all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "She's been so stressed lately," my mom said gently, placing a hand on my arm. "With everything going on in her life, we just felt she needed a break. We hope you understand." I stared at her, then at Marissa, who gave a casual shrug and an infuriating smile. "Thanks, sis. I could really use this," she said, as if I were some kind of travel agent granting her a last-minute favor. I looked at my dad, hoping for some kind of protest, an explanation, a plea to reconsider. But he just avoided my gaze and handed me his suitcase like a valet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't a shared family trip. This was my gift to them, something I'd spent years saving and planning for. They knew that. They knew. And still, they'd decided, without so much as a conversation, to replace me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to say no. But all I managed was a strained smile and a nod. "If that's what you want," I said quietly, my voice betraying none of the pain building behind my ribs. "Let's get going." The car ride to the airport was unbearable. Marissa chirped on about how excited she was for Paris, about asking if we had time for shopping and if the hotel had a spa. My mom replied warmly. My dad stayed silent. I drove, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt. As we pulled up to the drop-off lane, my mother leaned in for a hug. "Thank you for understanding," she said. "This really means a lot to Marissa." I forced a smile. "I'm sure it does." As they disappeared through the airport doors, something in me broke. All I could think was, it doesn't matter how hard I work, how much I give, how much I try. In their eyes, I'll always come second to her. But I also knew in that moment something had changed inside me, and they had no idea what was coming next. The drive back from the airport was one of the longest 30-minute rides of my life. Not because of traffic or weather, the sky was clear and the road empty, but because of the deafening silence inside the car. No music, no conversation, just the quiet hum of the engine and the storm inside my head. I replayed every second of that morning in my mind, over and over. My parents' smiles, Marissa's smug expression, my mother saying, "She needs this more than you," as if I hadn't needed anything, as if I hadn't needed them. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt numb. I sat in the car for a few minutes, hands still wrapped around the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. My suitcase, the one I'd packed so carefully for the trip, sat untouched in the trunk. I'd spent days folding outfits, organizing toiletries, printing out the itinerary. I'd even packed a little journal I'd planned to fill with memories from our travels. Now, all of it felt like a cruel joke. I finally got out of the car, dragging myself into the house like I was walking underwater. Everything felt heavier. The air, the silence, the weight of what I hadn't said at the airport. And yet, underneath all that disappointment, something colder was starting to take shape. Something sharper. I walked straight to my laptop. It was still open on my desk from the night before. I sat down, pulled up the travel folder I'd created, and stared at the screen. reservations, confirmation emails, booking details. I'd handled everything, from the airline seats to the hotel transfers to the prepaid museum tours in each city. Every step of this trip was made possible by my effort, my time, my money, and yet I wasn't on the flight. My hand hovered over the mouse for only a second. Then I opened the airline portal and canceled the upgraded seats. Gone. I logged into the hotel accounts, each one booked under my name, and began canceling the reservations one by one. Florence, Paris, Vienna, canceled, refunded, wiped clean. Then I moved on to the private tours, Rome's Colosseum walk, the Seine River dinner cruise, all gone. Within 20 minutes, the trip had crumbled. Not for me. I wasn't even on it, but for them. When the final confirmation email hit my inbox, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged them to reconsider. I hadn't tried to guilt them. I simply took back what was mine. They chose to exclude me. Fine, but they wouldn't be enjoying my generosity while pretending I didn't exist. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. For the first time that day, I exhaled fully. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was, deeply. But because, for once, I had taken control. The messages started about 9 hours later, just after their flight landed in Paris. My mom's first text was short. "Elise, the hotel says our reservation doesn't exist. Did you change something?" Then came a string of missed calls. A voicemail from Marissa filled with confusion and annoyance. "The front desk says nothing's under your name. What's going on? Fix this." I let the phone buzz on the nightstand. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through their increasingly frantic messages. They were stranded, confused, embarrassed, but mostly, they were shocked. Because for the first time in my life, I hadn't stepped in to fix what they'd broken. I hadn't smoothed it over. I hadn't made excuses or absorbed the blame. And in their silence between the messages, I could feel it sinking in. They thought I'd always be the one to clean up their mess. Not anymore. By the next morning, my phone was in full meltdown mode. I'd turned it off overnight, wanting just one night of uninterrupted sleep, and when I powered it back on, I was met with a tidal wave of notifications. 27 missed calls, dozens of texts, 3 voicemails from my mother, 1 from my father, and a predictably hostile one from Marissa. The first voicemail began with a clipped, panicked tone. "Elise, we need to talk. The hotel says they can't find our names anywhere in the system. Your father is furious and Marissa is, well, she's very upset. Please call me back immediately." The second was angrier. "This is not acceptable. We are in a foreign country with no place to stay. How could you do this to us?" The third had dropped the pretense entirely. "You've humiliated us, Elise. I can't believe you'd be so petty. I don't even recognize you anymore." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a long walk around my neighborhood. No phone, no distractions, just the rhythmic crunch of gravel under my shoes and the cool morning air brushing against my skin. The more I walked, the more clarity I found. It wasn't just about the canceled trip. It was about years of being dismissed, minimized, and expected to perform for approval I never received. This trip had been the tipping point, but the resentment that had been simmering for years. By noon, the text from Marissa came through. "This is seriously immature, Elise. You're ruining everything just because I got to go instead of you. Grow up." I stared at the screen, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. Got to go instead of me. Like I hadn't spent 2 years working overtime, missing vacation social plans just to afford this for our parents. Like she was the one doing them a favor. I thought about ignoring her too. But then I realized I didn't need to stay silent anymore. So I replied, "Marissa, I didn't ruin anything. I canceled a trip I paid for, one that was meant for me and our parents. If they chose to replace me with you, they could have planned their own vacation. But they didn't, because they expected me to still foot the bill. That's not pettiness. That's boundaries." No response. The next call came from my father. He rarely got involved in family conflict, always the quiet mediator, always just going along with what your mother decides. But this time, his tone was tight. "Elise," he said, "I don't know what's going on, but this isn't like you. You've always been the mature one, the responsible one. Please call us back so we can sort this out." I almost laughed. Of course, I was the mature one, the responsible one, the one who made sure things worked, and who, by that same token, was never allowed to feel anything when things went wrong. I was the fixer, the giver, the one who didn't make waves. Until now, I didn't call back. Instead, I went back to my journal. I started writing a list, not of tasks or things to fix, but of all the times I'd let my family's needs override my own. Christmas 2019, paid for Marissa's last-minute flight home after she blew her rent money. My 30th birthday, spent it helping Mom plan Marissa's baby shower. Dad's retirement party, stayed up all night organizing while Marissa posted selfies and drank wine. Each line was a small betrayal I'd swallowed to keep the peace. And for the first time, I wasn't swallowing anymore. Later that night, Grace stopped by with takeout and a knowing look. She'd seen the story unfold through mutual friends and social media. My mother had already started spinning her version of events, painting me as emotionally unstable and vindictive. "You okay?" Grace asked gently as we sat down on the couch. I nodded. "Yeah, actually, I think I am." Because the more they scrambled to rewrite the story, the more I knew I'd done the right thing. I wasn't angry for the sake of drama. I was standing up for myself in a way I never had before. Let them spin their version of the truth. Let them play the victims. I had no interest in being the villain in their story, but I also wasn't going to play the martyr in mine. Not anymore. 3 days after their return, I was sitting on my porch sipping coffee when my parents' Uber pulled into their driveway. I could see them through the trees, dragging suitcases, faces tight with exhaustion and frustration. Marissa was the first to spot me. She stepped out of the car, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, arms crossed. "I hope you're satisfied," she called out, her voice sharp and loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I didn't respond right away, just took another sip of my coffee, savoring the quiet. When they reached the bottom of my steps, I finally stood and looked them over, sunburned, flustered, and not nearly as glamorous as they probably thought they looked when they boarded the flight. "What happened?" I asked flatly, feigning innocence. My mother huffed. "Don't play dumb, Elise. You canceled everything. The hotels, the tours, the transportation. We had to figure everything out on the spot, and it was a disaster." My dad nodded silently behind her. For once, he wasn't even trying to smooth things over. He just looked tired. Marissa, of course, was livid. "You humiliated us. We were stranded in a country where we didn't speak the language, in crummy hotels, eating food that gave me food poisoning. You did this on purpose." I raised an eyebrow. "No. What I did was cancel my own trip. One I planned. One I paid for. The fact that you all thought you could just take it without me and still expect it to run smoothly, that's on you." "You could have told us," my dad said quietly. "You could have asked me," I replied. "You all made your decision at the curb that morning. Remember? Lauren needs this more, Elise. You can travel later. We're grateful, sweetheart." That's what Mom said, so I gave you what you wanted, a trip without me. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For once, she didn't have a quick rebuttal. "I saved for this trip for 2 years," I continued. "Worked overtime, skipped holidays, budgeted every single penny, and instead of celebrating that, you replaced me with the daughter who hasn't worked a job in over a year and still asks you to co-sign her car payments." Marissa scoffed. "I needed a break. You've always been so dramatic." I cut her off. "You needed a break? From what exactly? From shopping online and skipping job interviews?" "Marissa, you were given a luxury vacation that you didn't plan, didn't pay for, and couldn't even manage to enjoy because it wasn't spoon-fed to you." Her mouth snapped shut. "I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove I was worth your attention," I said, turning back to my parents. "That I was more than just the dependable one. That I mattered too. And this trip, that was supposed to be something we shared. A memory, a thank you. But you turned it into another reminder that in this family, I come second." The silence stretched out between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, my mother spoke. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Elise. But you did," I said simply, "and not just once, over and over again. You expect me to carry the weight of this family while constantly putting Marissa on a pedestal. I canceled the trip because I realized something. If I didn't draw the line, you'd never stop crossing it." My dad looked down at the ground. My mother stared off into the trees. Marissa, for once, didn't say a word. "I'm not here to argue," I added. "I'm not here to fight. I just needed you to hear me, for once." I turned and walked inside, closing the door gently behind me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for saying what needed to be said. I didn't feel like the villain. I felt like someone who finally understood her worth and refused to let it be trampled anymore. And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't scare me. It felt like peace. The days that followed the confrontation were quieter than I'd expected. No dramatic follow-up calls, no surprise visits, just stillness. It felt strange at first, like waiting for a storm that had already passed but left you so braced for impact that you didn't know how to relax. And yet, the longer the silence lasted, the more I started to breathe again. I spent that week doing things for me. I deep cleaned the house, not out of obligation, but because I wanted a fresh start. I pulled old photo albums out of storage and boxed up the ones that hurt to look at. Photos from family vacations where Marissa was front and center, and I was just the one holding the camera. I rearranged furniture, changed out linens, and created a home that finally felt like mine. Not a museum of compromises, not a reflection of the version of me my parents wanted, just mine. One evening, I pulled up the original spreadsheet I had used to plan the trip, the itinerary I'd curated down to the hour, the list of recommended cafes in Paris, the skip-the-line tour bookings, the cozy Riverview suite I'd picked in Florence. I scrolled through it slowly, my finger hovering over the delete button. But I didn't delete it. Instead, I opened a new tab and searched solo travel in Europe, not because I wanted to salvage what was left of the experience for them, but because I deserved that adventure. I'd earned it. I'd paid for it in more ways than one. This time, though, it wasn't about celebrating with my family. It was about celebrating me. A few weeks later, I booked the trip. A different route, a different season, and a different purpose. It wasn't about checking off landmarks anymore. It was about freedom. Paris, Florence, then a week in a quiet coastal town in Spain where I planned to read books and eat olives on a sun-drenched balcony with no one to rush me. The night before I left, I got a text from my mom. "Have a safe trip. I hope you find what you're looking for. We miss you." I stared at the message for a while. There was no apology, not really. Just an attempt to thread the needle of guilt and concern. Her specialty. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone a reply. Not when the years of neglect and favoritism had never been addressed. When I boarded the plane the next morning, I felt something shift in me. I wasn't just traveling, I was stepping out of a role I had played for too long. The fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who held her pain in her throat so that others could speak freely. That version of me didn't make it onto the flight. And Europe? It was everything I needed. Wandering the narrow alleys of Florence without a schedule, getting lost in Paris on purpose, ordering a bottle of wine at lunch because there was no one to judge me for it. It was healing in its purest form. No drama, no Marissa, no carefully calculated sacrifices, just me and a journal full of ideas about the kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. Back home, I found myself less reactive to the occasional calls and messages. They came, of course. Guilt is a habit hard to break, but I responded when I felt like it. I stayed firm. Boundaries once whispered became non-negotiable lines in the sand, and slowly the people around me started to adjust. Not all of them liked it. Some still tried to manipulate, but others, like Grace, cheered me on from the sidelines, reminding me that I wasn't wrong for choosing myself, that sometimes being the villain in someone else's story is the only way to be the hero in your own. By the end of that year, I didn't feel like the girl who stood in her parents' driveway, heartbroken and blindsided. I felt like a woman who had stopped asking for permission and started writing her own story. Not for approval, not for applause, but for peace. And that, more than anything, was worth every canceled reservation.